We're going to divide this up into photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration includes glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. First, let's talk about nutrition. Nutrition is the process of obtaining food that's important for proper health and growth of the body. This provides energy, which allows us to go through normal life processes. Different organisms get their nutrition in different ways. Autotrophs, such as plants, get their energy from the sun. Certain bacteria may use chemicals, which are called chemotrophs. Heterotrophs get their food or their energy from eating other things. It could be eating grass, which we learned is herbivore, or eating meat, which could be carnivore or omnivore. Let's first talk about autotrophs. Autotrophs, such as plants or certain protists like the euglena, can use sunlight to make their own energy. They go through the process which is called photosynthesis. The organelle that performs photosynthesis is called the chloroplast, and usually these organisms have green cells, which is from the pigment chlorophyll. As you can see in this picture, plants not only have a chloroplast going through photosynthesis, but they also have a mitochondria. So plants can get their energy from the sun performing photosynthesis, but they can also get their energy through cellular respiration. Photosynthesis. The basic chemical equation, if we look at the elementary school view, it's just water plus CO2 with sunlight makes sugar, oxygen, and water. But you need to know a balanced equation. That balanced equation is that H2O, there's actually 12 molecules of the H2O. That H2O enters in by the roots. Not only is that entering the plant, but CO2. There's 6 molecules of CO2 entering into the stomata, which is the space of the guard cell. Now, the guard cell is like a little lip all over the plant in which it's breathing in. Now, when sunlight uses the water and the CO2, combining them together and rearranging the molecules, it makes sugar, which is C6H12O6, oxygen, and more water. Now, specifically, how much oxygen? 6 molecules of O2. And how much water? 6 molecules of H2O. Now let's go back to that sugar in the product. The sugar is made up in the thylakoids, these little pancake stacks that are in the chloroplast. Now the sugar is being made, but then plants are going to store this sugar. It's going to be transported down the phloem to the roots. Now, the roots are going to store that food in the wintertime. So when plants lose their leaves, they're not performing photosynthesis anymore. They are actually hibernating. So plants that lose their leaves are not dead. They're actually hibernating in the winter, and they're using the stored sugar in their roots to survive. That's why we get a lot of nutrients from a lot of roots, such as carrots and radishes. Now, let's take a look at the oxygen. Just like the CO2 entered the stomata of the guard cells in the leaves, oxygen is going to be released. So oxygen is the waste product of the leaf. We breathe in oxygen as humans, that's our needed molecule, and we breathe out CO2, which is our waste. Okay, but plants breathe in CO2 and then breathe out oxygen. Not only is there oxygen leaving the stomata of the guard cell, but some water will be leaving. And this is usually left off in versions of photosynthesis, especially in elementary school and middle school. But this process is called transpiration, where some water, as it opens up, some water will come out and be evaporated. So when the water comes out, it's transpiration, and then it can go through something called evapotranspiration when it becomes evaporated. Now, plants have different pigments. Not only do plants have green pigments, but they have other color pigments. The green pigment is called chlorophyll, but the other pigments are carotenoids, such as carotene, which gives you an orange color, or xanthophyll. Xanthophyll is a yellow color. Now, the carotene and the xanthophyll, basically, these show up in the fall time. The production of chlorophyll drops, making it visible for us to see the orange and yellow. Here's the chloroplast. You can see on the left-hand side we have the outer membrane, inner membrane, And then on the inside, we have the stroma. The stroma is kind of like the cytoplasm inside this organelle. It's a colorless fluid, and this is very important because we're going to talk about this on the next slide. We're going to talk about this in a moment, but it performs something called a light-independent reaction of photosynthesis. Now you can see those little pancake structures. Those are called the thylakoids, these little flattened sacs. And when you have a stack of them, that is called grana. Now these are important because they go through a process called the light-dependent reaction of photosynthesis. Now let's talk about the light-dependent and light-independent reactions, also called the light and dark reactions. The light-dependent reactions occur specifically in the thylakoid. And the focus here, where sunlight is turned into specific energy molecules. Also, water is split here in the thylakoid and turned into oxygen. Now, in the light-independent reaction, also called the dark reaction, now this specifically is going to turn the CO2 into sugar by combining with other molecules. Now let's talk and move into heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, such as fungi and animals, are going to eat other things to get their energy. So they're not going to use sunlight to get energy. So specifically, when we breathe in oxygen, we think of respiration. But this is not necessarily what we're talking about. We're going to send the oxygen that we breathe in from our lungs by our blood to our cells. When the oxygen is dropped off in our cells, the cells are going to use that oxygen. So that is cellular respiration. Specifically, the mitochondria is the organelle responsible for using oxygen in cell respiration. Now remember, the plant cell will use the chloroplasts and the mitochondria to get energy. The mitochondria does use oxygen, so plants will mainly take in CO2, but they can use and they will use a little bit of oxygen. For cellular respiration, we have an equation. We have sugar plus oxygen is turned into the waste products of CO2 and water. If you look at that, that's actually a flipped version, pretty much, very similar to the equation of photosynthesis, where the reactants of sugar and oxygen in cellular respiration were the products in photosynthesis. So they're flipped. Here's a picture of the ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We have 3 phosphates. And then at the bottom here, respiration using oxygen versus not using oxygen. So if there's not a lot of oxygen present, it's going to be a different term or a different process. So respiration using oxygen is called aerobic respiration. Think about it if someone's doing their aerobics, they're breathing a lot. Now this is found in most plants and animals and yields lots of energy, 36 ATPs. But respiration without oxygen will not yield a lot of energy, and this is called anaerobic respiration. And this is mainly found in bacteria or yeast. Now if we're doing some high active sports such as sprinting, we're not taking in a lot of oxygen as much as maybe if we were breathing heavily during a long distance race. If I'm sprinting, there's a higher chance that I can form lactic acid in my muscles. And so basically this is based off of anaerobic respiration, not a lot of oxygen. As I said before, cellular respiration is going to be divided into 3 parts: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. These are different pathways. So these are called different biochemical pathways. And these pathways will actually be very important in the production of ATP. Now, glycolysis actually needs to start this going, needs energy to actually start this, and so it's not going to be yielding a lot of energy. Now, something I want you to be aware of is that ATP is one energy molecule, but if you see NADH, NADH means there are 3 ATP, or it's equal to 3 ATP. If you see FADH2, that refers to 2 ATPs. So if I ask you which is bigger, ATP, FADH2, or NADH, NADH would be more of a stronger energy molecule. Okay, here's the basic breakdown of of glycolysis in the Krebs cycle. As you can see, glycolysis is in the cytosol or cytoplasm. No oxygen is required, so basically not a lot of energy, only 2 ATP, and then it can actually go through something called fermentation. But when we get to the mitochondria, that's when we're going to have tons of energy, tons of ATP produced. Okay, here's the breakdown of glycolysis. Take a look at the picture. This is something very important that I need you to be aware of. If you look at the left-hand side, it actually shows a molecule breakdown in a very basic way. On the right-hand side, it actually tells you the molecule names. So glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. ATP comes in, adds a phosphate to that. ATP leaves as ADP now. Okay, so now that 6-carbon sugar has a phosphate hooked to it. Another ATP comes in, gives it a phosphate, ADP leaves, and now we have a structure that has 6 carbons and 2 phosphates on it, as well as some hydrogens and oxygens. Then what's going to happen is this is then going to be divided into 2 parts. No longer 6 carbons, but one molecule that's 3 carbons with a phosphate and one molecule that's 3 carbons with a phosphate. It then gets broken down even more, and all those names, when I was in college, I had to actually memorize those and understand what they were. Here we have some NADHs coming in, ATPs leaving, so that's going to be giving you some more phosphates. And then at the very end, and this is what's important, we have 2 3-carbon pyruvates or pyruvic acids. So this is the process of glycolysis. Large molecule breakdown and change, but the focus here is only 2 energies were given off. Now we're going to move on to the next part, which is the Krebs cycle. Remember, glycolysis, this is happening in the cytoplasm, not a lot of energy, only 2 ATPs given off here. But now those 2 pyruvic acids go to the Krebs cycle. They move on into the Krebs cycle, and so those pyruvates actually get changed again and again. You can see the little circles, those represent your little carbons. They get changed and lots of energy is being released. Okay, you can see we have a citrate, and then after that we have NADH being formed. Remember, NADH is 3 ATPs. Remember, NADH is 3 ATPs. So right now we're 2 plus 3, so now we have 5 ATPs, and then we're doing another NADH, and then we're doing a GTP, which is similar to ATP. Then we have a FADH2, then we have another NADH. We have lots of energy coming off here. Then at the electron transport chain, this is basically the final step. This is where a majority of the ATP is going to be created. The focus here is electrons are going to pass through the cell membrane, basically to power the movement of hydrogen atoms throughout this inner space, and when it does that, it produces lots of energy. Glycolysis, 2 ATPs, and then with the Krebs cycle and electron transport, we're making a total of 34 ATPs. Now that was in the cytoplasm in mitochondria, but if the pyruvates don't go to the mitochondria to perform the Krebs cycle, and it stays there, without oxygen, those pyruvates are actually going to turn into something called lactic acid. And this would be, without oxygen, this would be the anaerobic respiration called fermentation. So fermentation is without oxygen, and this actually creates little crystals. That's why we may get burning sensation in our legs, or feels like it's cramping up, or it really hurts when we're running in our diaphragm or in our legs or arms.